Here we have a camera, Retina II, type 011. You can tell the difference between the 011 and the 014 because the 014 has a film reminder dial around the top cover underneath the rewind knob. And so this camera, well, this is what I think of as one of the countdown cameras. As you know, I've already announced my retirement, but there were cameras flying in from all over the world at that time that I'd already accepted, and this is one of them. I think I have about 8 more after this that I'm probably going to have to deal with. So what have we got? Nice Retina II, type 011. It's got the Kodak lens on it, the Ektar f2 47mm. You don't see them as frequently as the Xenons, but yeah, very nice. Certainly stands out. Nice and crisp. Lens looks good. The state of this camera, what can we say about it? Well, the shutter's the big problem here. The focus is stiff. It's got a very reluctant to move. The shutter, I think it just locks open at a 10th. Oh no, it worked that time. Well, there you go on, what's that, a half second? That's not going anywhere. We could wait all day. That's never going to come home. So, this certainly needs to be stripped and completely serviced. Just give that a very gentle encouragement and make it complete. So what other problems we've got to deal with? Probably not much at all, but look at the state of these warts. Now, the owner wants me to leave the warts there. He thinks they add character. Now, I don't know, it really goes against the grain to leave things like that there. I mean, I'm sure it's written somewhere in the Bible, never suffer a Zeiss bump to live. I'm probably going to have to charge more to repair this just for the mental anguish of leaving things like that behind on the leather. So let's get into the repair itself. I'll start by removing the top cover, and removing the top cover I'm really going to want to start by removing the advance knob. And the advance knob, like a lot of these knob wind retinas, you need to put a spanner, a wrench on the top of that film advance shaft there. There's 2 flats there to hold that firmly. Then you've got to turn this opposite the direction of the arrow, whereupon it will magically unscrew, except of course this one won't, which of course is very common. Let's see if we can get this thing loose. So here I'm using a hose clamp. I've got a strip of leather inside that hose clamp. And this one's probably one size too big for the job, but we'll see if it'll do it. Okay, one thing I want to check to make sure that the hose clamp is not down on the top cover, because otherwise when we bash it, could bite into the chrome and do terrible things. We don't want any scarring, so I'm checking to make sure that we've got that high enough on that knob that that's not likely to happen. Get my spanner back on there. Yeah. That thing's just revolved too far. Now I've got to take that off again. Get my wrench on the flats of that knob. Right, back as we were. Now usually you can get enough purchase on this that you can do it by hand, just like that. Sometimes if they're very, very stiff, you might need to give that a little tap with a hammer. Okay, so that's off, that's loose. That'll now spin off. And we have no casualties, which of course is one of the main challenges. The rewind knob. All we need to do is put something through the fork of the rewind knob. In this case I'm using the handle of my tweezers. And then unscrew that. Now that button on top of the film advance lever, the shutter release, I'll need a tool for that. These crimp lug type pliers work well for this purpose. And what I'll do is I'll put a bit of leather around that button and hopefully that came loose. No, it didn't. That is very, very sharp edges on that. I'm going to try something else. I have these pliers that I use to get the rewind buttons off later retinas, and that'll do nicely. That is very, very reluctant. I suspect that that's been... It's not square. I suspect that was cross-threaded. Anyway, it's off. Yeah, that's that certainly didn't go in square. It had either been bashed or it was cross-threaded. Regardless, it's off. That's the main thing. And it had to come off. So 2 screws on the top cover, 1 at each end. Chrome plated brass. Of course you need to be very careful not to slip. You'll damage the screw head, or in a worst case scenario you'll scrape your screwdriver over the top plate, which would be unfortunate. So to get the top cover off, how do you go about that? Well, first thing you do is cock the shutter, roll the sprocket shaft forward with my thumb like that, hold down the shutter release button all the way with the tip of a screwdriver, and now I can lift the top cover back up off it and over, because we've got to get past this piece and this piece. So there's our top cover off. We can lift off the frame counter. Frame counter is 3 pieces. You've got a spring. I'm sorting these pieces out. This little piece here, the little slotted end of it goes against the wheel, and here's our numbered wheel, and I certainly don't want to put the numbered wheel through the ultrasonic cleaner, because the paint would come out and then I'd have to put it back. Okay, so you can start removing pieces here. That can come off. That can come off. Let's have the rangefinder off. Right, have a little look at that rangefinder. Now there's something ugly going on here. Now normally that prism would be locked in there with a little touch of lacquer, but that's got some horrible excrescence of adhesive on there. I don't know what that was. It doesn't matter, I'm not going to be disturbing that prism anyway, not in that holder. But that's just an odd thing to see. The glass here is quite cloudy, certainly needs to be stripped and cleaned. The semi-silvered mirror here, they're very delicate, you don't want to touch the silvering on that, otherwise you won't like the result. And let's have a quick look through this. It's very yellow, but yellow's normal. Some of them are possibly more yellow than others depending on the colour of the glass on that semi-silvered mirror. But the arm moves freely, that's good. We'll strip that down and clean that later. To the rest of the camera. Okay, so what I want to do here is unhook that spring. That's better. Take the tension off that. A single screw here. Oh, get that off later. That one runs right through and holds the struts in place. Let's take this one off. That spring I'll put aside. Don't put springs through the cleaner. The other pieces can go through the cleaner. This one complete with its spring. That little mask can come off. That screw and its little gear there, that can come off. Okay, here the shutter release can come out. There's no return spring or anything on that. This piece is a slot on the top of the shaft there. I'll just get my screwdriver in there, unscrew that. This upper lever, there's a thin washer, large hole. The lower lever, this lower lever, that does the rewind, or you release it for the rewind, and a smaller washer with a small hole. These wheels here are pinned together, so you can't lose those. This normally only goes in one way up basically. I'm just looking at the state of that. And the wheel with the notches in it is the one that was down. There are two springs here and here. Now they look a bit similar, but they're not the same. Take note of where they came from. In both cases they're held down by a similar shoulder screw. Three screws hold the top of the film advance bush in place. Oh, that screws tight. This camera's in fairly pretty condition. It may well be that it's done no work or very little work. Take the shaft out. That all looks nice and clean, if somewhat dry. Bring the body back in. Let's have this rewind out. Rewind shaft out. 3 screws. and at least they weren't too tight. Have those out. Okay, getting this apart. I'll get this spring off here, off the outside. This was a bit entertaining. Get under that with the tip of my tweezers, perhaps. I'd rather have that off so I can clean everything, but it's plain hard to get. Okay, we're in business. Off with that retainer spring, then we can take that out of there. And this, the centered piece, is held in with a small dog point screw here. And that will allow us to slide that shaft right out. This also has a little retaining spring on here. Now that stops that thing from slopping around too much. Okay, so the camera body's pretty much stripped down at the top. At the bottom, the tripod socket surround can come off. And all this has to come off because I've got to have the leather off the base of the camera so I can get the struts out. There's a nasty verdigris under there. To clean that up separately. Our depth of field scale here, be much the same. So the screws I'll put through the cleaner. These dials, they're painted markings, I will not. That spring can go through the cleaner. That washer can go through the cleaner. This I'll need to lift off so I can find my scalpel. Those Zeiss bumps are probably going to go. Okay, this is coming off quite well. Okay. Excuse me. Tripod socket. That doesn't really need to come off, so we'll just check that the screws are tight. That one wasn't. And leave that in place. Here's the screw I mentioned that holds the struts in place. Okay, so we can take the front apart now. I'll need to remove the shutter and lens assembly. I might as well remove the door while I'm here. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. On this camera there's a post down inside here that screws, that this actually screws into. That hinge pin screws right through and into it. It's awkward to get at, you need a long screwdriver. And you'll be able to see none of this probably. I can't see the slot in the top of that, nor can I get my screwdriver to engage. It's possible this one's too broad. If I've got a finer one here. Yeah, that one's finer, but see if that'll engage with anything. It's possible I'll need that there's no slot in there. Oh, yeah, there is one. Okay, so I'm unscrewing that. And that's what it looks like. It's that post there. I think that stops the travel of the film advance from going down too far. Now I can remove my two hinge pin screws from the front door. There's no similar piece at the top, only at the bottom of the camera. Let's swing that door forward. Are there any spacer washers under it? Doesn't appear so. Okay, and I'll lift that off out of that slot by pulling up on the door. Just unhook that. That's the front door. We can put that to one side. Okay, things a little bit more exposed now. I want to remove the lens and shutter assembly. I've got a lens spanner here. This is a Belgian tool. Mr. Belgian doesn't make them anymore as far as I know. He hasn't made them for years. You used to be able to get them on eBay. It's tight, but I don't feel that I'm engaging with the retaining ring. Might be just binding on that rear lens group. I'll try another tool. Yeah, it is coming loose. But what was the story? Well, the story was quite simple. This is tight on that rear lens group. That other tool was too. So that when it was engaged with the retaining ring, it was also rubbing on that lens. Retaining ring in here doesn't want to drop out of its position. Let's see if we can nudge that out. Now we'll separate that later. I'll put the shutter and lens assembly to one side. Let's carry on with this. So, this piece in the middle serves two purposes. It locates the lens and shutter assembly in most cases. Some of these do not have a locating screw and some do. This one does have a locating screw. in which case that locates into that little hole there. Some of them do not have one and they're only held in by friction. So we have 2 screws hold this ring on the front of the inner helical. One of these screws is already loose. And the one at the top here is on the arm hooked up to that ring. And this one pulls the rangefinder arm forward as you move the focus scale ring. So we can lift this piece out. You can see it there. So as the inner helical moves inwards or outwards with the focus, this arm is pulled forwards, which pulls the rangefinder forward. So our focus scale ring, well, this is stiff. So what I'm looking for is any sign that it's actually been so stiff that the focus scale has moved on the outer helical. I'm not seeing any sign that that's the case, which is good. So I'll mark its position and we'll put it back exactly where we found it. And there's every likelihood that the focus will be correct. So normally, let's get this round to the infinity stop for good measure. Scribe a line across the outer helical and the focus scale ring. Now I've got somebody else's marks here which serves some purpose that they thought was clever. I don't know how that'll relate to this. And I put one mark across the top, the upper part, again between the outer helical and the focus scale ring. I haven't taken that across the inner helical. Those surfaces aren't level. I need to make sure that I have a reference point for those when I get there. So the 4 retaining screws, get those loose, recover them for the cleaner. Take off the focus scale ring. The black screws here hold the bellows to the back of the front standard. So loosen up those. And the bellows should fall back in, they do. The 6 small nickel plated screws hold the retaining ring in place. And here you can see I'm supporting this front standard between finger and thumb. I'm not pressing down on the camera on the bench top. If you press down on the camera on the bench top when you're doing this, you're in great danger of damaging the struts, bending them. Right, that's our 6 screws loose. Gather those up. Take the retaining ring off. The inner and outer helical should come out together. They're a bit stiff. I need to mark these, so I'm going to adjust the inner and outer together until I've got the front surface level with each other. So I need a reference point I can instantly recognise. Just hold this up with the window light. It's running a straight edge over here to see where they are. Yeah, that's good. And what I'll do is I'll continue my scribe marks that I put on the outer helical all the way across to the inner helical. Had 2 at the base and 1 at the top. Now I've got a reference point there. I know exactly where that's to go back to. This is very, very stiff with dried out grease. So for the rest of this, well, the focus mount here is held in 4 screws. Okay, so we can have the focus mount out. We'll recover the 4 screws that held the bellows in place. This will have to be cleaned by hand. The screws can go through the cleaner. So, now we just need to get the struts out of here. Just collapse this for a second. There are 2 screws in the body well here, in the film cassette chamber. And they're ridiculously tight, so they're not coming loose without a little bit of assistance. There's one at the top here, which I think I'd already discovered was quite tight. It's that post screw. It's coming loose. There's one at the bottom there in that recess, and it looks like it's well gummed up with the shellac or whatever it was they used to glue that leather on with. So I'm going to put a bit of solvent down there to loosen that up, or hopefully to loosen it up. We'll at least loosen up the lacquer, and then we'll get those screws loose.